I'm Jacob Moore, 40, from St. Louis, Missouri. My wife, Laura, and I have been married for 12 years. We've had our ups and downs, like most couples, but nothing too serious. At least, that's what I thought. A few months ago, my father was turning 70, and we planned a big birthday party at the family country house just outside the city. It's one of those grand estates that feels like it's been frozen in time, hidden deep in the woods, acres of land, and enough space for all the extended family. My brothers, cousins, and close family friends all gathered, ready to celebrate Dad's milestone. Laura had always been good with my family, charming, personable so naturally, I didn't think twice about her being around everyone. The party started out perfectly. The sun was shining, the barbecue smelled heavenly, and we had a massive cake adorned with candles for my dad to blow out later. I was running around, making sure everything was smooth, managing the drinks, talking to relatives, ensuring Dad was happy. Laura, ever the social butterfly, was off chatting with my cousins, laughing at old family stories. Everything seemed fine. As the night wore on, people started to head home. That's when I noticed something odd. Laura had disappeared. At first, I figured she was taking a break from the crowd. She sometimes slipped away during parties to decompress, and I always understood that. But when I realized I hadn't seen her in over an hour, that odd feeling in my stomach grew. I excused myself from the remaining guests and went to look for her. I searched the kitchen, the porch, and even the pool house, but there was no sign of her. As I made my way upstairs to check the guest rooms, my stomach twisted with dread. The hallway was eerily quiet, the sounds of laughter from downstairs barely a whisper. That's when I saw a door at the far end of the hall, slightly ajar. I approached cautiously, my mind spinning. Pushing it open, I stopped dead in my tracks. There, on the bed, tangled in sheets, was Laura, my wife of 12 years, entwined with my cousin, Tom. Tom was 57, nearly 20 years older than Laura. He was always the smooth-talking flirt of the family, the one who never quite grew up, but I never imagined he'd cross that line. They froze when they saw me, scrambling to cover themselves, wide-eyed with shock. Laura looked pale, caught like a thief in the act, but Tom? He had the audacity to smirk. That smug look, it set something off inside me. But instead of confronting them in a rage, I turned and left the room without a word. There was no point in yelling or demanding explanations. I had something else in mind, something much better. The seeds of revenge were already beginning to take root. As I walked back downstairs, my heart was pounding, but not from rage, at least. Not the kind of rage that makes you explode. This was different. It was cold, calculating. I wasn't going to let them get away with this, not in the way they might expect. By the time I reached the main party area, I had already started to piece together my plan. I saw my brother, Will, chatting with a few cousins. Will's always been my closest confidant, the one person who's always had my back. I walked up to him, keeping my voice low. "I need a minute with you," I said, pulling him aside. "What's going on?" he asked, sensing the tension. "I just found Laura with Tom," I said, my voice steady despite the weight of the words. "Upstairs. Together." His eyes widened, and a mix of shock and anger crossed his face. "Are you serious? That snake?" Will looked like he was ready to march upstairs and punch Tom's lights out, but I stopped him. "Not yet," I said, a small, bitter smile forming on my lips. "I've got a plan." Earlier in the day, we had set up a surprise tribute for my dad, something heartfelt and touching. We had planned to play a video, filled with photos and videos of him through the years, followed by personal messages from friends and family. The projector was already set up, and everyone was eagerly waiting for the moment. That's when an idea struck me, a way to expose Laura and Tom in front of everyone, to strip away their smugness and leave them humiliated. I pulled out my phone and showed Will the pictures and video I had just taken of the two of them upstairs. Evidence. Cold, undeniable proof of their betrayal. "Help me with this," I said. "We're going to add a little something extra to Dad's tribute." Will's face darkened, but he nodded. "I'm in." We pulled aside a few of my tech-savvy cousins, guys I could trust to keep their mouths shut, and quickly explained what had happened. Together, we worked to splice the footage from my phone into the birthday tribute video. It didn't take long. We had all the equipment set up and ready to go. We inserted a clip of Laura and Tom, right in the middle of the family photos and messages. By the time we were done, the living room was packed with the remaining guests' family and close friends, all gathered for the big birthday surprise. Dad sat front and center, his face glowing with anticipation, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit. I called everyone's attention. "All right, everyone," I said, forcing a smile. "It's time for the birthday tribute. We've put together something really special for Dad." I could see Laura and Tom slipping back into the room, both trying to blend into the crowd, pretending nothing had happened. My heart raced, but I kept my composure. The video started, just as we'd planned. The first few minutes were filled with laughter and nostalgia pictures of my dad as a young man, clips from family vacations, and birthday messages from old friends. Everyone was smiling, and for a moment, it felt like a normal celebration. But then, the screen flickered. The video cut to the footage I had taken upstairs. Laura and Tom, caught in the act. Gasps filled the room. People's heads snapped toward the screen, then toward Laura and Tom. I watched as the color drained from their faces. Laura's eyes went wide, her mouth falling open in shock. Tom, that smug bastard, just stood there, his confidence melting away as everyone in the room realized what was happening. The silence was deafening. My dad, who had been sitting with a big grin on his face, slowly turned to look at them. I'll never forget the look in his eyes: disappointment, anger, and something that cut even deeper. His eyes locked on Tom, his own nephew, as if trying to comprehend how someone he trusted could betray him like this. No one said a word, but they didn't need to. The looks on everyone's faces said it all. Laura bolted from the room, her face red with shame. Tom followed close behind, his head down, too much of a coward to face what he had done. I let them go, knowing that their humiliation was just beginning. And in that moment, as the room buzzed with whispers and disbelief, I couldn't help but feel a quiet satisfaction. I had one. As soon as Laura and Tom ran out of the room, a stunned silence hung over the party like a thick fog. I watched the ripple of reactions. Some guests looked confused, others angry. My father was still frozen in place, his eyes dark and brooding. Will was the first to speak, breaking the quiet. "Unbelievable," he muttered, shaking his head. I knew Tom was a scumbag, but I didn't think he'd go this far. I nodded, but my eyes were on Dad. Slowly, he stood up, walking toward me with a heaviness in his steps. For a second, I wasn't sure what he was going to say, but then he reached out, placing a firm hand on my shoulder. "Jake," he said, his voice low and calm, though I could hear the strain beneath it. "I'm sorry you had to go through that. You didn't deserve it." His words hit me harder than I expected. I had been so focused on getting back at Laura and Tom, I hadn't really thought about how this would affect Dad. But seeing his disappointment, knowing that someone he loved and trusted had betrayed him too, it stung in a different way. "Neither did you," I replied, my voice tight. "I didn't want it to happen like this, but they forced my hand." Dad sighed, rubbing a hand across his face as he glanced around the room. The guests were still murmuring in disbelief, some already heading for the door, unsure how to handle the awkwardness of the situation. "I think we've had enough of a party for one night," he said quietly. "Let's wrap this up." With Will's help, I started ushering the remaining guests out, thanking them for coming and apologizing for the unexpected drama. They were polite about it, but I could feel the weight of their questions hanging in the air. Everyone wanted to know what had happened, but no one wanted to ask directly. By the time the house was cleared, it was just Dad, Will, and me left in the kitchen. Dad sat at the table, staring at his empty glass. "I can't believe Tom would do something like this," he muttered, shaking his head. "Family. I thought that meant something." "Guess not to some people," Will replied, leaning against the counter. He shot me a look, his eyebrows raised in question. "What's next, Jake?" It was a good question. The video had done its job. It had exposed Laura and Tom for what they were, leaving them humiliated in front of everyone. But now that the immediate revenge was over, there was the matter of my future. The betrayal still burned in my gut, but I had to figure out what came next for me. I glanced at my phone, seeing several missed calls from Laura. She had probably panicked and tried to explain, but I wasn't interested in hearing her excuses. I knew what I had seen, and no amount of sweet talking could undo that. I've already started the paperwork for a divorce, I said. I want her out of my life for good. Will nodded approvingly. Good call. She doesn't deserve a second chance after that. Dad looked up at me, his face somber. What about Tom? You planning to confront him? I considered it for a moment, the idea of facing Tom one-on-one tempting me. But then I shook my head. He's not worth it. I already humiliated him in front of the whole family. That's enough for me. Dad sighed, nodding in agreement. You're probably right. We sat in silence for a few minutes, the weight of the night settling in. Despite the satisfaction of my revenge, there was still an emptiness left behind. 12 years of marriage, shattered in one night. It was hard not to feel the loss, even if I knew I was better off without her. I'm going to take some time for myself, I finally said. Figure out what's next. I'll need to move out of the house, we bought it together, but I can't live there anymore. Will gave me a sympathetic look. If you need a place to crash for a while, my door's open. I appreciate that, but I think I need a clean break. Somewhere new, where I can start fresh. Dad gave me a weak smile. You'll get through this, Jake. You're stronger than you know. I wasn't sure if I believed him yet, but I nodded anyway. Maybe, in time, I'd see the strength he was talking about. The days following the party felt like a whirlwind. After that explosive night, I moved quickly. Laura didn't come home that night, which was a relief, but I knew I had to face her at some point. The next morning, I called a divorce lawyer and began the process of disentangling my life from hers. It was painful, sure, but I was driven by a need to move forward to reclaim control. As expected, Laura tried to reach out multiple times. Texts, calls, voicemails. Her messages ranged from tearful apologies to angry rants, but I wasn't interested in playing that game. I ignored every single one, letting my lawyer handle everything from now on. A few days later, she showed up at the house while I was packing up my things. I was in the living room, boxing up some old photos when I heard the front door creak open. Laura stood there, her face pale, eyes red from crying. For a split second, the familiarity of her, the woman I had shared a life with, tugged at something inside me. But it was fleeting. The betrayal was too deep. Jake, please, she started, her voice shaky. Can we just talk? I straightened up, crossing my arms. Talk? About what, Laura? About how you and Tom decided to throw away everything we had for a fling. What's left to say? Tears welled up in her eyes, and she took a step closer, her hands clasped together like she was pleading. It wasn't like that. It was a mistake. A horrible, stupid mistake. I don't even know why it happened. I let out a bitter laugh. A mistake? One time, maybe. But this wasn't one time, was it? She flinched, guilt written all over her face. No, she whispered. It wasn't. There it was, confirmation. Any small part of me that had wanted to hear her side, to try and understand, vanished. The reality of her betrayal settled in, hard and cold. Then there's nothing left to talk about, Laura, I said, my voice steady. I'm filing for divorce, and I want you out of the house. I've already moved most of my things out. You can stay until the paperwork is finalized, but after that, we're done. She reached for me, her eyes wide with desperation. Please, Jake, don't do this. We can work through this. I know we can. We've been through so much together. I love you, I cut her off. You loved me? You don't cheat on someone you love, Laura. You made your choice. Her shoulders sagged, and for a moment, I thought she might collapse. But then something shifted in her expression, a flicker of anger rising beneath the surface. This was a mistake, Jake, she said, her voice growing sharper. But don't pretend you were the perfect husband either. You were always so focused on your work, on everyone else but me. Maybe if you'd paid more attention, this wouldn't have happened. I stared at her, incredulous. So it's my fault now? You're blaming me for your affair with my cousin? She clenched her jaw, clearly realizing she'd said too much. No, I didn't mean it like that. I don't know. I shook my head, the last threads of patience wearing thin. Get out, Laura. Get out of my life. Without another word, she turned and left, the door slamming shut behind her. I stood there in the now quiet house, my chest tight, but somehow lighter. It was over. That night, I packed the last of my things and moved into a temporary place downtown, a modest apartment with just enough room to clear my head. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and that was all I needed right now. I spent the next few days focusing on the practical things, sorting out the legal stuff with my lawyer, transferring assets, and getting my finances in order. But in the quieter moments, the weight of it all would hit me. The life I'd built with Laura, our home, our memories, was gone. Some nights, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I had missed the signs. How could I have been so blind? That's when I decided I needed a fresh start. Will, true to his word, had offered to let me crash at his place, but I didn't want to live in the past, surrounded by family who knew too much. I needed distance, a new beginning. I started looking for a new home, something away from all the memories. A clean slate. One afternoon, while scrolling through listings, I found it. A small, modern house on the outskirts of town, tucked away near a lake. It was peaceful, serene, and exactly what I needed. I put in an offer, and within a few weeks, it was mine. Standing in front of the house for the first time, the keys in my hand, I felt a surge of hope. This was it, a new chapter. I wasn't the same person I was before, and maybe that was a good thing. I'd been hurt, yes, but I wasn't broken. As I stepped inside my new home, I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past slowly start to lift. The betrayal had left its mark, but I had survived it. And now, I was ready to move forward. Moving into the new house felt like the first real step toward leaving the past behind. I spent the first few days settling in, unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, and making the place my own. The house was perfect, a peaceful retreat by the lake, far from the chaos of my old life. I could look out over the water and feel the quietness settle into me, like a balm for my wounds. But no matter how much I loved the new space, there were moments when the betrayal still gnawed at me. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, my mind flashing back to that moment at the party, Laura and Tom caught in the act, the smug look on Tom's face, and Laura's weak apologies afterward. Those thoughts would drag me back to a place of anger, and it was hard to shake it off. One evening, as I sat on the back deck, watching the sunset over the lake, I got a call from Will. I hadn't talked much to anyone since moving into the new place, just needed space to process everything. "How's the new house?" Will asked, his voice calm and steady, like always. "It's good," I said. "It's quiet here. Peaceful. Glad to hear it." There was a pause on the line. "Look, Jake, I didn't want to bring this up, but have you heard from Tom?" I clenched my jaw, the anger bubbling up again at just the mention of his name. "No, and I don't want to." "Well," Will continued cautiously, "he's been asking about you. He feels like he should apologize, make things right or whatever." I let out a bitter laugh. "Make things right? How does he think that's possible?" "I don't know, man," Will said, clearly uncomfortable, "but he's been reaching out to a few family members, saying he regrets what happened. He even talked to Dad. I thought you should know." I stood up, pacing the deck. "Of course, he's trying to smooth things over now. It's all about saving face for him." "I don't trust him either," Will said. "But you've always been the one to think things through, Jake. Just don't let him get under your skin again." "I won't," I promised. "He's out of my life. That's final." After hanging up with Will, I tried to let the conversation roll off my back, but the thought of Tom trying to weasel his way back into the family infuriated me. He didn't deserve that chance. Not after what he'd done. I pushed those thoughts aside and decided to focus on something productive. I'd been considering taking on a new project, a hobby to occupy my time and give me something to look forward to. The house had a small workshop out back, and it was the perfect space to work on something hands-on. I'd always liked the idea of woodworking, and now seemed like the perfect time to try it. A distraction, maybe even something to build with my own two hands. I spent the next few weeks immersed in the project, learning the craft, working late into the night on building furniture for the house. There was something soothing about the process, measuring, cutting, shaping. It took my mind off everything else, at least for a while. But, as it usually goes, just when I started to feel like I had control over my life again, something happened to shake it. A few days later, I was in town, grabbing coffee, when I spotted a familiar face across the street. It was Laura. She was walking toward me, clearly having seen me first. I hadn't seen her since that day at the house, when I told her to get out of my life. She looked different. Her usual confident, put-together appearance was gone. She looked worn out, her eyes tired, her shoulders slumped. I tried to duck into the coffee shop before she could reach me, but it was too late. She called my name, her voice strained. "Jake, wait." I stopped, turning to face her. "What do you want, Laura?" She hesitated, biting her lip before speaking. "I know you don't want to talk to me, but I had to tell you something." "I don't care what you have to say," I said coldly. "It's over. I've moved on." "I know that," she said quickly, her voice cracking. "But I didn't come here to beg for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve that. I thought you should know I am moving away. I took a job out of state, and I'm leaving in a few weeks." Her words caught me off guard. I hadn't expected her to leave. Part of me was relieved, but another part of me, the one that still held onto some faint memory of our life together, felt a strange sense of loss. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Because I wanted to give you some closure," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "I know I ruined everything, Jake. I know I hurt you in a way that can't be fixed. But I wanted to say goodbye properly before I go." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. There was no part of me that wanted to forgive her. But maybe this was the final chapter, the end of something that had long been broken. "Goodbye, Laura," I said, my voice soft but firm. She nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. "Goodbye, Jake. I hope you find happiness." Without another word, she turned and walked away, her figure disappearing into the crowd. I stood there for a moment, letting the weight of it all sink in. It was really over. She was leaving, and I was truly free to start over. As I walked back to my car, I felt something unexpected, a sense of peace. Maybe this was what I needed all along. Closure. A clean break. And now, with Laura gone, I could finally focus on my future. After Laura left town, the sense of finality settled in. The chapter of my life with her in it had truly come to an end, and I could finally breathe. For the first time in months, I didn't feel that weight pressing down on me, the constant reminder of betrayal, the what-ifs that kept swirling in my head. It was just over. I threw myself into my woodworking projects, turning that small workshop into a space of creativity and purpose. I wasn't just building furniture anymore. I was building something of my own, something that wasn't tied to anyone else. In the quiet hum of the saw, the smell of fresh wood, and the satisfaction of putting something together piece by piece, I found a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. But life, as it tends to do, had another twist in store for me. One afternoon, while working on a new dining table, my phone buzzed on the workbench. Wiping my hands on a rag, I glanced at the screen and saw a text from Will. "Call me ASAP. It's about Tom." A familiar surge of anger washed over me at the mention of his name, but I dialed Will back anyway. He picked up on the first ring. "Jake, we've got a situation," he said, his voice tight. "What now?" I asked, exasperation creeping in. "Tom's been going around, trying to play the victim," Will explained, "saying he made a mistake, that he deserves another chance with the family. And some of the relatives, well, they're starting to feel sorry for him." I let out a sharp breath, shaking my head. "Of course he's trying to worm his way back in. That's what he does." "Yeah, but it's worse than that," Will said. "He's been showing up at Dad's house, talking about how he regrets everything and how he wants to make amends. He's trying to get in Dad's ear, Jake." That hit me harder than I expected. I knew Tom would try to claw his way back somehow, but the idea of him using Dad's vulnerability, his need for family, to weasel his way back into everyone's good graces infuriated me. "What does Dad think about this?" I asked, gripping the phone tighter. "I don't know," Will said. "Dad's been quiet about it. I think he's still angry, but Tom's been persistent, and you know how Dad is. He's always trying to see the good in people, even when they don't deserve it." I could feel the frustration rising in my chest. Tom didn't deserve forgiveness. Not from me, not from Dad, and certainly not from the family. "I'll talk to Dad," I said, my voice low. "I'm not letting Tom weasel his way back in." That evening, I drove over to Dad's place. It had been a while since we'd really talked. After the party, things had been strained, and I knew Dad had been dealing with his own feelings of betrayal, not just toward me, but toward the whole family. I didn't want to reopen old wounds, but I couldn't let Tom manipulate him. When I arrived, Dad was sitting on the porch, a cup of coffee in his hands, watching the sunset. He looked older than I remembered, more tired. The past few months had clearly taken a toll on him. "Hey, Dad," I said, stepping onto the porch. He looked up, giving me a small smile. "Jake, it's good to see you." I sat down next to him, and for a moment, we just sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "Will told me Tom's been hanging around," I finally said, breaking the quiet. Dad sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "Yeah, he's been coming by, saying he wants to make things right." "And what do you think?" I asked, studying his face. Dad took a long sip of his coffee, staring out into the distance. "I don't know, Jake. Part of me wants to tell him to stay the hell away, that what he did was unforgivable. But he's family, and it's hard to just shut that door forever." I felt a surge of frustration. "Dad, I get that family's important to you, but what he did, he destroyed any trust we had. He didn't just betray me, he betrayed you and this entire family." Dad nodded slowly, his face etched with sadness. "I know, and I don't trust him, not after what he did. But people make mistakes, sometimes big ones, and I'm trying to figure out if this is one we can come back from." I shook my head, trying to rein in my anger. "Some mistakes are too big to forgive. You don't owe him anything, Dad. You gave him trust and respect, and he threw it away." Dad didn't say anything for a while. He just stared down at his coffee cup, lost in thought. Finally, he spoke. "You might be right, Jake. Maybe this is one of those things that can't be fixed. But I've always believed that everyone deserves a chance to make amends." He turned to look at me, his expression serious. "That doesn't mean we forget what he did, or that we let him back in like nothing happened. But if he's genuinely sorry, I think we have to at least hear him out." I bit my tongue, wanting to argue, but I knew my dad well enough to know when his mind was set. Still, I wasn't ready to forgive or forget. "Not yet. If you want to hear him out, that's your choice," I said, standing up. "But I'm done with him. He's not welcome in my life, no matter how sorry he claims to be." Dad looked up at me, his eyes soft but resolute. "I understand, Jake, and I won't ask you to do anything you're not ready for. But just know that you don't have to carry this anger forever." I nodded, but the bitterness in my chest remained. I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. As I drove back to my new house, I thought about what Dad had said. About forgiveness, about moving on. Maybe there was a lesson in all of this, but I wasn't there yet. The betrayal still felt too raw, too personal. Maybe someday, I'd find a way to release that anger, but for now, I wasn't ready to forgive or forget. Weeks passed after that conversation with Dad. I focused on building my new life, but the tension with Tom still lingered in the background like a bad itch I couldn't quite scratch. He stayed away from me, but I kept hearing whispers from family people debating whether he deserved a second chance, some even hinting that I should be the bigger person and forgive him. I wasn't interested in being the bigger person, not after everything. But as much as I tried to push it all aside, Dad's words kept gnawing at me. I'd spent months consumed by anger, and part of me wondered if that was really the life I wanted. Carrying the weight of betrayal was exhausting. It didn't hurt like it had in the beginning, but it was always there, like a shadow hanging over everything. One evening, after finishing a particularly complicated project in the workshop, I sat outside on the deck, watching the sun set over the lake. The peacefulness of the place had always soothed me, but that night, it wasn't enough. I felt restless. I couldn't stop thinking about Tom, how I had let his betrayal define my life for too long. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts, landing on Tom's name. The last thing I wanted was to hear his voice, but I needed closure. I needed to confront him and say my piece, once and for all. With a deep breath, I hit the call button. To my surprise, he picked up after the first ring. "Jake?" His voice sounded unsure, almost hesitant. "Yeah, it's me," I said, keeping my tone flat. "We need to talk." There was a long pause before he replied. I didn't think you'd ever call. I've been wanting to apologize. To explain dash, I don't want an explanation. I cut him off. I've heard enough excuses. I just need you to understand something. He fell silent, waiting for me to continue. You didn't just betray me, Tom, I said, the words coming out steadier than I expected. You tore apart our family. You humiliated me. You lied to everyone who trusted you. You think you deserve forgiveness just because you're family, but family doesn't do what you did. I know, Tom said quietly. I screwed up, Jake. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I've been trying to make things right with the family, but I don't know how to fix this. You can't fix it, I said bluntly. That's the thing, Tom. Some things can't be undone. You're going to have to live with that. I heard him take a shaky breath. I am sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am. I wish I could take it all back. I don't need your apologies, I replied, my voice softening just a little. I just needed to tell you this so I can let go. I've spent too long being angry, and I don't want to carry that anymore. You made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences. But I'm done letting what you did control my life. There was a long silence on the line before Tom finally spoke. I get it. I really do. And I'm sorry, Jake. I'll stay out of your way from now on. Good, I said, my voice firm again. Do that. I hung up the phone and stared out at the lake, feeling lighter. I didn't know if I'd forgiven Tom, exactly, but I had said my piece. And in that moment, I realized that maybe Dad had been right about one thing. I didn't have to carry this anger forever. I could let it go. In the following weeks, I focused on my own life. I didn't keep tabs on Tom, and I didn't need to. My life wasn't about him anymore. The divorce with Laura went through smoothly, and I got the house in the settlement. I sold it and used the money to invest in my woodworking business. The new house by the lake became my sanctuary, a place where I could move forward, leaving the pain behind. One afternoon, Will came by for a visit. We sat on the deck, drinking beers and catching up. It had been a while since we'd had a real conversation, and it felt good to reconnect with my brother. So, I heard you talk to Tom, Will said after a while, giving me a sidelong glance. Yeah, I said, nodding. I did. How do you feel about it? I took a sip of my beer, thinking it over. Better. Not great, but better. Will nodded, a small smile on his face. You seem different, Jake. Calmer. I guess I am, I admitted. I've let a lot of things go. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the breeze from the lake rustling the trees around us. I felt content. The anger that had once consumed me had loosened its grip, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had control of my life again. You know, Will said, his tone lighter now, I think you've got something good going here. This place, your work, it's all coming together for you. I smiled, feeling the truth of his words. Yeah, it is. And in that moment, I realized that life had moved forward, and so had I. The betrayal that once felt like it would crush me was just a chapter in my past now. A painful one, yes, but it had also taught me how to rebuild, how to reclaim my own happiness. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine again. And that, I realized, was enough. Discover more stories. Subscribe today.